Good morning and welcome. I'm Wendy Brennan and I coordinate Senator Krueger's Senior Roundtable series. As some of you know, it is budget season in Albany, and unfortunately, Senator Krueger will not be able to join us today, but she does send her best wishes. So I want to welcome everybody who is viewing this event on Zoom and on Facebook, or who are calling in to our 2023 Senior Roundtable series, Living Well, Age-Friendly Housing. And this morning's program is going to provide information about the Senior Citizens Rent Increase Exemption Program. And as always, you have closed captioning of today's event. And as a viewer, you have to activate closed captioning to view the text on your device. So if you're in Zoom, click on live transcript in the meeting controls to start viewing closed captioning. And if you are in the Facebook Live event, you'll see a settings button in the bottom right-hand corner of the video. Click on CC for closed caption to activate the process. So this forum is being recorded today. Everyone who RSVP'd for the event will receive a link to the video of the event in a few days. You'll get all of the information that we put in the chat and the presenters' PowerPoint presentations. Today's roundtable is titled Stay Put for the Long Term, the Senior Citizens Rent Increase Exemption Program. And we receive so many calls in the office about people concerned about the affordability of their housing. So if you live in a rent-regulated apartment, you are 62 years of age or older, you may be eligible for the SCRIE program, and that's really going to help keep your apartment affordable in the future. And we have extremely knowledgeable speakers today. First, you'll hear from Kim Lerner. She is the director of the Benefits Outreach Program at Live On New York. And Kim will give you a brief overview of the benefits program and, of course, tell you about the SCRIE program. And after Kim, we'll hear from Eni Park. And she's the ombudsperson at the Office of the Taxpayer Advocate at the city's Department of Finance, and that agency administers the SCRIE program. So Eni is experiencing difficulties with Wi-Fi, so she won't be on camera for this event, but you'll be able to hear her and follow along with her PowerPoint during the presentation. Many of you submitted questions about SCRIE ahead of time. And after the presentation, Audrey Tannen, who many of you work with, will be moderating the Q&A portion of today's event. We received lots of questions about how to apply for SCRIE and what actually counts towards that $50,000 income cap. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Kim Lerner. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And thank you everybody for joining us today. Before I begin, I want to thank Senator Krueger and her wonderful staff for inviting me to talk with you today about SCRIE. And also I will talk a little bit about SCRIE as well. Senator Krueger and her staff work tirelessly for older adults. They are really champions for older adults in New York City. So it's really Live On's honor to partner with them, given any opportunity we can. So thank you again, Wendy and Senator Krueger. So before I begin to talk about SCRIE, I do want to tell you a little bit about Live On New York because some of you may not be familiar with us. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, I hope everybody can see that. Okay, so as Wendy said, my name is Kim Lerner, and I am the director of Live On New York's Benefits Outreach Program. Live On New York is a nonprofit membership organization with over 100 member agencies who provide programs and services to older adults in New York City. So our members include older adult centers, case management agencies, caregiver support programs, and works, among many others. And Live On's overall mission is to make New York City a great place to age. And we do that by supporting our members, the older adults that they serve, and really all older New Yorkers, with the following areas. We advocate for just policies on behalf of our members and older adults on a state and city level. So that includes issues such as affordable housing, sufficient funding for programs and services, and access to benefits for older adults. Our second area is our professional development and coalition building. And then our third is our benefits outreach program, which I am proud and honored to head. And our benefits outreach program screens older adults for a whole host of benefits such as SNAP, SCRIE, Medicaid, the Medicare Savings Program, and many others. And then we assist in the application process. And Live On really created this program because firstly, we know how essential benefits are to people remaining in their homes and being able to afford living in New York. And secondly, we also know how overwhelming and difficult the benefits application process can be. So we really tailored our program to meet that need. So I will tell you a little bit more about how Live On can help you towards the end of my presentation, but now I will delve into SCRIE and DREE. Alrighty, so as many of you know, SCRIE and DREE is also known as New York City's Rent Freeze program. SCRIE is the Senior Citizen Rent Increase Exemption, and DREE is the Disability Rent Increase Exemption. They're essentially the same benefit. They both freeze the rent or maintenance for tenants who live in certain types of rent-regulated apartments. Now, before I really begin, I want to just mention that something really important, and that is because clients and older adults and everybody comes to us when they're talking about SCRIE, and many people are anxious to apply for SCRIE because they're fearful that their landlords will be angry at them or they'll be penalized in some way. And that really should not be happening. Landlords do not lose money if you receive SCRIE or DREE. Landlords receive a property tax abatement in the amount of the difference between the frozen rent and the increased rent. So keep that in mind. And also, just per the law, landlords must accept SCRIE or DREE. So landlords should not be dissuading you from applying. Okay, so there are four main criteria for eligibility for SCRIE and DREE. First is the status of the tenant. So that's the age for SCRIE or the disability for DREE. Second is the type of apartment that they live in. Third is the income. So just remember that it's just income. They do not look at your resources when you're applying for SCRIE or DREE. And fourth is the amount of income that you pay towards the rent on a monthly basis. So just focusing on status for SCRIE, the tenant on the lease must be 62 years old or older. For DREE, the tenant on the lease must be receiving disability benefits, which includes Social Security disability, U.S. Veterans Disability Pension or compensation, or disability-related Medicaid. There are really only four types of apartments that are eligible for SCRIE or DREE. Excuse me. The first is rent-stabilized apartments. Second is rent-controlled apartments. Then there's Mitchell-Lama and HDFCs, both of which are co-ops, and also SROs and some types of hotels. So you must be living in one of these types of apartments to be eligible for SCRIE or DREE. The third area is the household income, as I mentioned. And unlike other benefits, SCRIE and DREE are based on last year's income. So if you were to apply now in 2023, they would look at your income for 2022, the total income. And the total household income must have been $50,000 or less, again, for the previous year. And when we say household for SCRIE or DRE, that means everybody in the household except roommates and boarders. So that includes spouses, children, adult children, grandparents, anybody else except roommates and boarders are included in that annual income. And finally, there's the amount of income that you pay towards the rent. To be eligible for SCRIE or DRE, you must show that you're paying at least a third of your income towards the rent. So for example, if your monthly household income is $1,500, your rent must be at least $500 a month to be eligible. So there are two agencies, New York agencies, that administer SCRIE depending on the type of apartment that you live in. If you are living in a rent stabilized apartment, rent controlled, SROs or hotels, you would apply through the New York City Department of Finance, also known as DOF. If you live in a Mitchell-Lama or an HDFC, you would apply through the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, also known as HPD. So that is if you apply for SCRIE. If you need to apply for DRE, all DRE applications, no matter where you live, what type of apartment you live in, will go to the Department of Finance. So in addition to the application, which is actually a relatively easy application for a Mitchell-Lama apartment, it's just one page. And for the Department of Finance or rent stabilized, rent control, etc., it's about 3 pages, but it's very clear and it's easy to understand. So in addition to the application, you also need to provide supporting documentation. And it depends on the type of housing, again, that you live in. For rent stabilized tenants, you need to provide your ID with your date of birth, and it's IDs for everybody in the household. If you're applying for DRE, you would need to provide proof of your disability benefits. So that would mean your current, they ask for your current Social Security disability benefit award letter. You also need to provide current and previous leases, and they both must be signed by both your landlord and tenant. And then, of course, the previous year's income. So if you file taxes, you need to provide your tax return, and everybody's tax return who is in the household if they file. If you don't file for taxes, then you need to provide, or family members need to provide end of year statements. So that includes your 1099 if you're receiving a pension, W-2 for if you're employed, and or your Social Security end of year statement. If you live in a rent control apartment, you most likely do not have a lease, or if you have a lease, it is a very, very old lease. So to be eligible for SCRIE or DRE during the application process, you must provide your current and previous maximum collectible rent form, also known as an RN-26. So that's a form that your landlord should be providing to you every year. And of course, also your previous year's income, as would be in a rent stabilized apartment. If you live in a Mitchell-Lama or HDFC co-op, again, IDs for everybody with date of birth. You also need to provide again last year's income, previous year's income, and your tax return. Now, if you do not file a tax return and you live in a Mitchell-Lama or HDFC, you must provide an IRS non-filing letter to prove that you don't have to file or you didn't file. So you can request that letter from the IRS. So in addition to that letter, you would have to provide your end of year statements for last year, the 1099s, W-2s, etc. But you really must provide that non-filing letter if you don't file for taxes. And finally, you'd also need to provide your Social Security award letter for the current year. And that's only for Mitchell-Lama or HDFC. If you're applying for rent in a rent stabilized apartment or rent control, you do not have to provide that documentation. Alrighty, so I wanted to go over what is considered countable income, because there's always confusion about this, and to be honest with you, we get confused as well. So this is not an exhaustive list, but just the most common ones. Social Security benefits, pensions, wages, unemployment, workers' comp or disability benefits, IRA and annuity earnings, capital gains earnings, interest or dividends, or interest and dividends, any support that you may be receiving from family or friends. You would need to get some kind of documentation, either a letter of support that show that you're receiving income from them, any kind of rental subsidies that you may be receiving. And if you have a roommate or a boarder, you would need to provide proof of that rental income that you're receiving. So just to touch on the excluded income, so this is income that is not counted when you're applying for SCRIE or DREE. That includes cash gifts, any kind of inheritance you may have received last year or the year before, any damages that you're awarded from a lawsuit, energy assistance like heat or any utility assistance program, income tax refunds, IRA and annuity distributions, so that's withdrawals that you're receiving, or and the SNAP, if you're receiving SNAP benefits, those are not included as income either. There are only a few deductions, income deductions that you can take if you are over income for SCRIE or DREE, and that is that your federal, state, city, and Social Security taxes. Those may be deducted from your income to get you down to an eligible income level. Unfortunately, medical expenses such as the Medicare Part B premium or any kind of health premiums, those are not deductible, unfortunately. So once you have SCRIE, in order to maintain the benefit, you do need to submit a renewal every 1 or 2 years, depending on your lease and the type of apartment that you live in. If you live in an HPD apartment, so that is to say a Mitchell-Lama apartment or an HDFC co-op, HPD requires that you renew every other year. And for both all types of SCRIE and DREE, the agency will send you a letter to remind you that you need to renew. But that's essential. So again, just to reiterate, applying for SCRIE or DREE if you're a rent stabilized, rent controlled SRO hotel applies through the Department of Finance. And I have links to where you can access the applications. For SCRIE or DREE, you can apply online, or you can apply through the mail with a paper application. And that is for applications that go to the Department of Finance. If you're living in a Mitchell-Lama or an HDFC, you apply again through HPD, Department of Housing Preservation and Development, and you can access the application online at the address that I'm showing on the screen. And you can submit the application by mail or by email. Email is scrie@hpd.nyc.gov. So just briefly, how Live On New York, our benefits outreach program, can assist you if you'd like to see if you're eligible for benefits. So when somebody contacts our benefits outreach program, we will screen everybody for all of the benefits programs because many people are just not aware of the benefits they may be eligible for. So we will make sure that you will be able to access the benefits you can be eligible for. And we will explain carefully and thoroughly what each benefit does, eligibility, and the entire application process. We can assist in compiling the documentation because we know that can be very overwhelming for anybody. We will assist you in completing the application, and we will submit the application on your behalf. And very importantly, we will provide support throughout the application process because we know that there can be hiccups along the way. So we are there to troubleshoot and resolve any issues that may arise, and we hopefully will resolve them for you. So if you want to contact us, our benefits outreach program, our phone number is 212-398-5045. And you can also reach us via email at benefits@liveon, liveon-ny.org. And if you'd like to reach out to me directly, you're welcome to do that. Again, my name is Kim Lerner, and I can be reached at klerner@liveon-ny.org, or you can give me a call at 212-398-6565, extension 228. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim. That was great. And now we are going to move to our next speaker, Eni Park. And Eni is the ombudsperson at the Office of the Taxpayer Advocate at the New York City Department of Finance. Welcome, Eni, and thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Good morning. As Wendy mentioned, my name is Eni Park, and I'm the city SCRIE ombudsperson. Before I start, I just wanted to thank Senator Krueger and her amazing staff for inviting me, and thanks to Kim Lerner for sharing her expertise. As you'll see, there's a lot of information about SCRIE that tenants need to know, and community partners like Senator Krueger's office and Live On New York are absolutely crucial to our outreach efforts. So thank you so much. So let's just start by going over what we will be discussing today. We'll talk a little bit about how the rent freeze ombudspersons can help, how to get more time to complete an application, what options you might have if your application is denied or revoked, how you might continue the benefit of a prior household member, certain circumstances that might allow you to adjust your frozen rent, and what happens to your benefit if you move. I think we can move forward 2 slides, actually. Okay, so just to give you an idea of who we are, the SCRIE and DRE ombudspersons are part of the Office of the Taxpayer Advocate, which is part of the Department of Finance, but it's independent from the other units. So, for example, we're not actually part of the SCRIE unit, even though we help people with SCRIE. Essentially, the ombudsperson is who you talk to when you've done everything you're supposed to do to get into SCRIE or stay in the program, but it just hasn't really worked out. The Department of Finance does have an entire separate customer service division, and that includes people from the SCRIE unit, and they're really your first stop if you need help. But if you've tried them and they're not giving you the help you need, you can come to us. Often people will come to us after working on an issue with the SCRIE unit that's particularly complicated or unusual and just needs someone to take a deeper look. You can also contact us if you've been denied or revoked and considering an appeal, or if your appeal's been denied. And we can show those bullet points, I think. I mentioned a moment ago that we're independent from the SCRIE unit, and that's important because if we think that there's a possibility of getting you the result that you want, we are there to advocate for you. SCRIE will ultimately have the final say, not us, but we can help you make the best possible case to take to them, and we can also communicate internally with the department. And finally, the ombudspersons publish a report each year that goes to the City Council with our recommendations to the Department of Finance for changes to SCRIE. So we take input from the public about larger problems with the SCRIE program. Now, not all of our recommendations are accepted, and some take years to implement, but they can change the way SCRIE works. And later on in the presentation, I'll give you an example of how our annual report can bring about changes in SCRIE. So to our first question, and that is the next slide. What if I need more time for an application? So one of the questions that we often get from community partners is, what can I do for a tenant who can't get an application in on time? So there are 2 ways a tenant can get an extension. The first one, which is going to be the first section, is an extension for good cause. For this type of extension, you simply make a written request to SCRIE. It includes the reason that you need more time, and there's no way to know in advance what SCRIE will accept as good cause, but the rules refer to extraordinary circumstances that constitute good cause. So It can't just be that you didn't realize there was a deadline, for example. It's got to be something that indicates that you couldn't have made that deadline. And the other type of extension, and that's the next point, is one based on a physical or mental impairment. And for this one, there's a specific application that you can find online. And by the way, all of the applications and forms that I mentioned can either be found on the Went Free's website, or you can call 311 and ask them to be mailed to you. Generally, whatever the physical or mental impairment is, you have the best chance of getting the extension if you can get something in writing, signed by a medical professional. If the extension is approved, you then still have to submit the documents that you're supposed to have done in the first place. So being approved for the extension doesn't mean that your SCRIE application is automatically approved. Both of these types of extensions can apply to any deadline, whether it's the 6-month grace period for renewing, or a deadline given to get in additional documents, or any other submission that a tenant has to make. And keep in mind that whatever the reason is that you give for needing the extension has to apply to the time when you are supposed to get those documents in originally. And finally, there's no deadline for submitting a request for extension. So I recently had a tenant who didn't realize for several years that he'd forgotten to submit a renewal application. And the reason he forgot turned out to be a serious medical condition that he was being treated for at the time. But of course, his benefit was revoked for failure to renew. Even though he applied for the extension literally years after the fact, the extension was granted. He got in all of the paperwork that he still owed to SCRIE, and he was able to be reinstated to the program retroactively and get SCRIE for all those years in between. And so those are good things to know if you feel like you're just not going to make a deadline. The next slide is another question that we get asked a lot, and it's part of what our office is really there for. What if my application is denied or my benefit is revoked? And revoked just means your renewal was denied. That's what SCRIE uses for denials of renewal applications as opposed to initial ones. Well, if you're denied or revoked because SCRIE has found you to be ineligible, and that's our first point there, you can always reapply, but it will be with a new initial application, even if you were on the program previously. Now, usually, SCRIE resets the frozen rent when you submit a new initial application, just as they'd set the frozen rent for a first-time applicant. But if you were revoked on a renewal specifically for being over income and you're reapproved sometime in the following year, you submitted a new initial application, it's going to be no later than the following year, you might get to keep the same frozen rent amount as before. So SCRIE refers to these situations where a tenant basically has 1 year of unusually high income as income spikes. But no matter what, until you reapply and are approved, you won't have SCRIE. And if you wait too long, you'll no longer be considered an income spike, and they'll reset your frozen rent as if you were a new applicant. So it's best to reapply and get in a new initial application as soon as you have your next year's income documents to submit. And I mention this because income is the most common reason for people to be denied or revoked. And people who don't realize that there is such a thing as the income spike will wait, reapply years later, and then they have to start over at a much higher frozen rent. So it's good to keep that in mind, that you might be able to get back on the program at the same frozen rent as previously. So if you're denied or revoked and you think SCRIE made a mistake, you can use the next option if you're denied or revoked, and that is to appeal. Appeals are due within 6 months following the decision letter. And again, there's a specific application on form. But especially if you don't understand why SCRIE denied or revoked you, and the information in the denial letter is not helpful, take the time to contact SCRIE or our office to get more details. And that way you'll be able to give SCRIE a specific basis for reconsidering. If your appeal is denied, the Department of Finance rules don't allow for a second appeal. So technically your only option at that point would be to take it to court and to ask the court to review SCRIE's decision. So obviously that's a major undertaking and extremely difficult to do without an attorney. Some tenants turn to legal aid or legal services, but if you can avoid that, obviously that's the best option. So even though SCRIE won't allow you to submit another appeal, our office might get them to reconsider even after you've been denied in your appeal if we have a solid basis for thinking they got it wrong. So if you feel like there's just a plain error that SCRIE is not seeing, contact our office, even if you've already made an appeal. Sometimes it's just a matter of knowing the SCRIE rules and regulations well enough to point SCRIE in the right direction, and that's where we can help. Now, if you were denied or revoked for the reason of missing a deadline, you can appeal that as well. But really, your only chance there is if you have a clear documentation of when you mailed in the documents. And so this is why we suggest that you keep copies of anything you send to SCRIE and get a receipt, or better yet, a tracking number for anything you send. And of course, if you did miss the deadline, but you had good cause or a physical or mental impairment, you can apply for an extension, as was discussed previously. So the next question is one that we also get. Unfortunately, people don't realize sometimes that this even exists, but it is possible to take over someone else's benefit, and it's called appropriately a benefit takeover. And it can happen if a SCRIE tenant dies or moves out permanently, and a household member who is or will become the primary tenant in that apartment applies to step in to the prior tenant's SCRIE shoes, so to speak. This is someone who has the right to continue the existing lease, someone who's been living in the apartment usually. It's not someone who just happens to be moving into an apartment where the prior tenant had SCRIE. Now, because a benefit takeover is considered the continuation of a benefit, the frozen rent remains the same. Previously, I mentioned that a new initial application resets the frozen rent. So that's why if you're a remaining tenant that's taking over the lease from a prior SCRIE tenant, you don't want to submit a new SCRIE application. You want to apply for a benefit takeover. I've seen benefit takeovers where the parent signed up for SCRIE 20 years ago and the child takes over and the rent hasn't increased in 20 years. If that person reapplied, they would be paying the new rent instead of continuing at the old frozen rent. So to take over a benefit, these are the requirements. The person applying has to be eligible for either SCRIE or DRE at the time when the other tenant dies or moves away. And it doesn't matter which one the prior tenant had. Either one will allow someone to take over the benefit regardless of what was there before. So if the prior tenant had SCRIE and you're eligible for DRE, that's fine. You can still take over the benefit. And unless you're the spouse of the prior tenant, you have to submit a benefit takeover application within 6 months or within 90 days of receiving SCRIE's revocation letter, whichever is later. And spouses and non-spouses alike need to show proof of the prior tenant's death or permanent move and show that they, the new tenant, they're either on the lease or they get in writing that their landlord agrees that they're going to become the new primary tenant. So it used to be that if the prior tenant hadn't named you as a household member, and this is the next point on the slide, if you hadn't been named as a household member on a SCRIE application by the prior tenant, you wouldn't be eligible to take over their benefit. A SCRIE tenant would pass away and their spouse or son or daughter who'd been living in that same apartment for a decade sometimes would apply to take over the SCRIE benefit and be automatically denied because their name had never shown up before. And that was usually the first time that the surviving tenant learned about this thing where you had to have been listed. And since they can't continue the benefit now, their frozen rent is gone. I mean, they could reapply, but as I said, the new frozen rent could be hundreds of dollars more. But now, happily, this has changed. So now, even if you weren't previously on the applications, you can still take over the benefit. You'll still have to meet all the requirements. But if you recall, I mentioned that I point out an example of how the Ombudsperson's annual report can change SCRIE. And this change was one of our recommendations, that a tenant who wasn't previously named would still have the opportunity to apply for a benefit takeover. So SCRIE agreed to the change, but, and this is the new rule, people who weren't previously named as household members will be asked to submit their income information for any prior application years when they were living in the apartment so that SCRIE can check whether the income would still have been eligible if that additional household member had been included. Okay, so that's benefit takeovers. The next topic is one that unfortunately, we get this question more and more, especially in the past few years. Tenants ask us, is there any way to lower my frozen rent? Unfortunately, SCRIE doesn't work like other benefits that look at how much you make, except when they're looking at whether you're eligible at all. The only time that SCRIE actually lowers your frozen rent based on your having less income is called a redetermination, but it's very difficult to be approved for this. So to be considered for a redetermination, you have to have been on SCRIE for at least 12 months. And if you were revoked and restarted, that 12-month count starts over as well. So we can actually move to that bullet point with the 12-month requirement. Yeah, and keep going. Thanks. And your income has to have dropped by at least 20% since your last approved application, even if you're on a 2-year cycle and we're talking about numbers that are 2 years or more in the past. And you have to prove that whatever caused your income loss is a permanent situation. And that last one is what makes redeterminations so hard to get. So the events that SCRIE sees as a permanent income loss, these tend to be a household member's death, or the SCRIE tenant moving permanently to a care facility, or someone permanently retiring who used to have wage income. And when I say permanently retiring, I mean that SCRIE requires you to provide a notarized affidavit saying that you don't ever intend to return to work, or a doctor's letter saying that you can no longer work. Some examples of things that do not ordinarily count as permanent income loss are losing your job, or having your business shut down, or having a temporary roommate move out. But if you can meet all these requirements and your redetermination application is approved, your frozen rent will be reduced by approximately the same percentage as your loss of income. So mostly I see frozen rents decreased by 25 or 30% when a redetermination is approved, but I've also seen frozen rents decreased by 70%. So if you think that you might qualify for a redetermination, make sure that you get help getting an application in within the time. So that's redeterminations. And finally, we'll talk about what happens if you move to a different apartment. And I'm covering this topic because we find that tenants aren't really aware of what's supposed to happen if they move. It's not just asking for SCRIE to change the address on their account. Continuing your benefit in a different apartment actually requires what's called an apartment transfer application. And in order to continue getting SCRIE, the new apartment also has to be rent regulated. So tenants will often assume that having frozen rent means that you pay the same rent, even if you change apartments. You just take that frozen rent with you, but that's really not the case. Unless the rent in the new apartment is exactly the same as your current rent, that frozen rent is going to change. Specifically, a higher rent, we're talking lease rent to lease rent, means that that move will come with a higher frozen rent. So you wanted to go into exactly how SCRIE determines your new frozen rent. There's this technical formula, but for the vast majority of tenants, this is how you'd estimate the frozen rent in a new apartment if you moved. So first, you have to know what your landlord is getting each month before the move. And that's basically the difference between the full rent in your lease and the frozen rent that you're paying. And then you subtract that amount from the rent in the new apartment, and that will most likely be the new frozen rent. Let me give you an example so that it's concrete. So for example, let's say you're paying $1,000 in frozen rent. Your current lease says your full rent amount is $1,200. So that means your landlord is getting an extra $200 a month from SCRIE. So you're looking to move to a new apartment where the rent is $1,500 a month. You take that $200 monthly benefit that your landlord is getting, that same amount, and you subtract it from the new lease rent of $1,500, and you get your new frozen rent, $1,300. So you can see in this example, for this particular tenant, the frozen rent is going to go up by $300 if they move to that new apartment. Now, it is possible for your new lease rent to be lower than your current frozen rent. It's very unusual. But if that is the case, there's really no point in putting in for an apartment transfer. The best thing to do then is just submit a new initial application and let SCRIE know in advance, if possible, when your lease in your new apartment will start. So those are the topics that I wanted to cover with you today, and I hope it's been helpful. And I thank you all for being here today. And if nothing else, I hope that you'll remember that the ombudspersons are another resource for you when you need special assistance with any of your SCRIE issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Enia. As Wendy said, I'm Audrey Tannen, and I'll be leading you through the Q&A session. I'm really thrilled to be doing it with people like Kim and Enia, who are our go-to people on these issues. As you can see, they're expert professionals and they're also expert explainers. So we will have a worthwhile discussion. Just want to give you a reminder that if you're not doing quick note taking, don't worry too much, because everybody who RSVP'd for this event will get the recording as well as all the links that we're sharing. So not to worry, we will send that to each and every one of you. But there were a lot of questions asked in advance, and we've had a lot of incoming. So let's go right to it. And I guess it will just be whoever feels they want to answer, just join in. The first question is really very general in terms of income level and taxes. Is it net or gross that is considered for SCRIE?
What it is, well, as I mentioned, the only deductions are taxes, so federal, state, and city taxes. So the amount is after taxes. So that would be net.
If I could just add to that, a lot of people assume that it's like your adjusted gross, you know, or it's calculated the way you calculate your income for your federal taxes, but it's not. It's basically everything and exactly what Kim said, minus your federal, state, and local income taxes and Social Security taxes. So it's very close to gross, but not quite.
Thank you. Another question, and we know that sometimes paperwork does not go as smoothly as we all hope. So question, where can someone go if they actually want to bring their materials, their paperwork? I don't know if Live On does that. I know there's a SCRIE outreach office, but can you tell people where they might be able to just bring the application and their supporting documentation?
Well, in terms of the Department of Finance, there are business centers in each borough. In Manhattan, I know it's at 66 John Street. As Audrey mentioned, you don't have to write it down, though. You'll be able to get this information. But you can go there as a walk-in. They recommend that you make an appointment, but they will take all your documents in person. If you're in one of the other boroughs, you might want to check. They don't all do SCRIE and DRE every weekday. But yeah, all of them will take your documents in person.
And I, excuse me, and I can speak for Live On New York. You are welcome to make an appointment and come see us in person. And we will go over the application with you, help you complete it if you need assistance, and we can actually submit it to you directly, submit it for you directly to the Department of Finance or HPD. So you're welcome to give us a call and come see us.
Thank you. And now, and we know this is becoming more and more common, the signed leases from the landlord, the delays of people getting those returned leases. What can you do? Can you still apply for SCRIE even if your lease hasn't been returned?
I'm going to jump in, and maybe Amy thinks differently, but we always suggest that applicants do apply, send in their application while they're waiting for the landlord to sign the lease. If they're not signing the lease, there is a form that you can fill out that addresses that issue.
Thank you.
I completely agree with Kim. And this is not just for if you don't have a lease. If you think you might be over income, but you're not sure, just apply. The worst that can happen is you'll have to apply again if they say no. The tricky thing here is if you're an initial applicant, it's very difficult to be approved on an initial application without a lease at all. This is something actually that our office is working on right now. We're trying to figure out what for an initial application SCRIE might accept as a reason for not having a lease, and allowing that person's rent to be frozen, and then the landlord will get their credit whenever the lease gets in. But as of right now, if you don't have a lease for at least one of your leases, your current or your prior lease, for an initial application, it's very unlikely that you can get approved. But again, just apply, give your reasons for not having a lease and see what happens. For a renewal, like Kim said, there is a form. It's called the Certification of No Renewal Lease. You can submit that in place of your lease. And I think you have to attach a utility bill to show that you still live there. And the only thing about that is you can't use it for 2 renewal cycles in a row. So unfortunately, we do have tenants who have multiple cycles where their landlord just won't give them their lease. And what you need to do at that point is file a complaint with the New York State Department of Housing and Community Renewal. You have to have some sort of documentation that you filed this claim, and SCRIE will accept that. You know, if you've already used up your certification, SCRIE will accept that to continue your benefit. But even that, they can't accept over and over and over and over. At some point, you are going to have to get your lease. And I do think, it's best to get help from organizations like Kim's to fill out those forms and, find out how to do that with DHCR. But that is an option as well.
Thank you. Excellent. Excellent. Now we do have a little version of this, which is my mother's landlord is insisting she pay the new higher rent since her renewal hasn't been submitted, but her renewal hasn't been submitted. This is her SCRIE renewal because he hasn't returned the lease. I was told there is a 6-month grace period, but the management is telling us this is not true, is it? Does her mother have to pay the higher rent or not? This is for a SCRIE renewal.
There is a 6-month grace period, so absolutely. But I definitely think that she should submit the renewal as soon as she can, without the lease being signed.
Yeah, if it's a renewal, she can submit the certification of no renewal lease instead. All it requires is, that you say you've made an effort to get the lease, you can't get it, and like I said, maybe a utility bill. The other thing is that 6-month grace period is guaranteed by law. They can't just say, sorry, you have to pay the full rent amount. The landlord is obligated to accept your frozen rent during that period, unless, at some point, if you turned in your application and you get denied, you're revoked, then yeah, you owe the full rent. Or, if the 6 months passes and you still haven't gotten in your renewal, but until then, you do have the right to continue paying your frozen rent. And even if they bill you for a higher amount, that doesn't change the fact that you have that you're eligible to continue paying your frozen rent.
And we spoke about household. There were a lot of questions about household income. And I think Kim clarified that spouse and children are part of the household income, but roommates would not be. But if you have income, because you're renting out your apartment, that is something you have to report. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And how is that reported? Is that part of, if you're not saying it on your taxes?
Well, that's always the tricky thing. And that's where people get in a little hot water, because they should be reporting it, of course.
Yes.
But if they're not, of course, they can provide a letter or a proof of the payments, but just to play it safe, report it.
Yeah, we agree. We all agree here. All 3 of us are on the same page. That's really about it. Now, I tell you, there are a lot of questions about how income is calculated. And I know sometimes when we talk in general ways, it's very difficult. There's a lot of nuance for everyone's individual income situation. One question that came up is privacy. The concern that whatever they submit to SCRIE, is the landlord going to get this kind of information? Is their privacy maintained and secure?
So everyone in the Department of Finance has to sign something every year that says, we understand that we handle sensitive tax information and that we won't share it. And this is on top of our internal policies. If your landlord contacts us and asks you for information, we're going to say no. They can try to get that information by submitting a Freedom of Information. It's FOIL in New York State, right? They can, apply to the legal department, but the legal department is not going to give them your private, economic, financial information. And that this is all very tightly governed. So those are our rules internally.
Okay. So everyone should feel very confident that whatever they share, it's private. It's not anything that your landlord would be exposed to. They'll only learn that you are on SCRIE though. That, the landlord is informed of that.
And we mentioned also whether or not you've reported, the income that you get from your boarders, as Audrey said, and Kim said, be safe, report it. But if you don't report it, it's not like we would share that information with the IRS. I mean, in fact, we don't share information with the SCRIE in it if, you want us to keep it just between us. But yeah, it's not like that information is even, connected to other government agencies or anything like that.
And I know, Eni, I know we've already asked this of you, but I'm going to ask you again in this forum, the COLA and Social Security increase, the recent one, and how is that affecting SCRIE awards?
Okay, so the short answer is the 5.9% increase that you had last year is going to be taken out of your income when they calculate your income. So that's just for that year. The long answer is every year, SCRIE compares the percentage increase of Social Security versus the percentage increase in the Consumer Price Index. If Consumer Price Index is higher, they don't count your Social Security increase. So that's why last year, with the Consumer Price Index increase of, I think, 7.5 or 6.5%, one of those, that being higher than the 5.9% that you got from Social Security, none of that is going to be considered part of your income. That's how they calculate it. So for that particular year, I can tell you, yeah, that they're actually going to pull that out and not count it as income.
Okay, and we're going to continue on with the income questions. What about the IRA distributions? That is very confusing to so many. And can you clarify it's, the required minimum distribution, how that might affect your income and your SCRIE award? Or there's a lot of concern about that. Although, is it exempt or is it part of the income calculation? I don't know. Yeah.
Amy, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you wanted to respond.
Yes.
It is a very difficult question. So the broad answer is distributions are not supposed to be counted as income. Earnings on those accounts are supposed to be counted as income. That sounds straightforward, but we only even got this level of clarity very recently. Really, SCRIE needs to look at the type of income it is as it's coded on your 1099 form. And that's how they make the final determination as to whether it's income or not. Sometimes I'll actually ask for statements so that they can figure out if what you're reporting is earnings on the account or if it's a distribution. But the broad rule is if it's just a distribution, it's not supposed to be included. But if it's earnings on the account, it is supposed to be included.
So dividends and distribution, required distributions are earnings. No,
required distributions are generally, very generally speaking, they shouldn't be considered part of income.
Okay.
But it just depends on the type of account it is. It depends on a lot of things.
So we'd say again, apply.
Yes,
apply.
just apply. And if you think that SCRIE has gotten it wrong, you can contact our office, right? These questions are all very difficult.
And they're unique and it's each individual's profile is different with these things. And now we get to the 1/3 of the monthly income. And how do you, if it's not just I get my Social Security check, which is a clear, this is what I get each month, and maybe a pension, but maybe you have other parts of your income. How do you know what that monthly income is? Can you just take the annual and divide it by 12?
That's what we do when we're assisting clients, yes.
And that's how
Right.
SCRIE is supposed to, they add up your entire annual income divided by 36. That's 1/3 of your monthly. That's the number they're supposed to use.
Okay, so it's 36. Okay.
Well, divided by
Um,
12 and then divided by 3.
Okay.
Shortcut.
We want to, I'm just going through. A lot of people ask the question about raising the 50K cap. I think we probably all agree with that.
Yeah.
I just want to make a notation that I think until 2014, the cap was at 29,000.
Yeah.
For a very, very long time. It was Mayor de Blasio who helped initiate, we've got to move this cap up. And I know Senator Krueger agrees that the cap should be moved up, but it has to really start with the city and then be approved. I don't know if you know of any recent actions to try and increase the cap. Has anyone heard about any initiatives?
I haven't heard on the city level, but I have heard on the state level.
Right.
Actually, also on the city level, there are many different ideas going around as to it. Some want to just simply increase the cap. There are other questions about tying the increases to an index. There are others about changing it to something more like adjusted gross income, but everybody is of the opinion that leaving it at 50,000 is just not a thing that's going to work.
And people are asking, suppose I'm only $400 over or $100 over these caps. Is there any chance to get SCRIE?
Honestly, no. If
Yeah.
you are 1 cent over,
I know.
this is not our office. We'll try and find you that cent actually somewhere. But from SCRIE's perspective, the law says 50,000, and that is where they're going to cut off, the income.
A question also about ERAP, the rent assistance program, and someone got, a nice amount of that. Is that included as income?
It's not included as income because it goes directly to the landlord for the rent. So it's not included as income.
And Enia, everyone is very happy to meet you and know you exist. And there's a question, do the Mitchell-Lama residents have a similar ombudsman at HPD?
Not that I know
people?
of. No, I mean, it's such a completely separate system that I couldn't even say for sure, but not that I know of. We have some contacts there, and I think we would know if there was an ombudsperson there. But
I certainly can give you the phone number to reach somebody there.
Wow.
Yeah.
I would like that.
So if you'd like to take it down, it's 212-863-8494, and they'll direct you to the somebody who can help you.
Thank you. We knew all questions would be answered in this session. There is a question, some more questions, and one is about when can you apply? Suppose you're in the middle of a lease, you signed a 2-year lease, your income changed drastically after a year. Can you apply mid-lease and use your more current tax forms? And if so, would a SCRIE benefit be frozen would it be retroactive to what it was before this recent increase?
I'm gonna leave that for Amy if she can.
Okay, so the way, well, first of all, yes, you can apply anytime. You can apply with a week left on your lease, anytime. The income that they'll accept is always going to be the prior calendar year's income, except between January 1st and April 15th of each year, they will also accept 2 years back. Now they sort of unofficially had that rule, but now it is a rule, or at least a policy. So if you have a choice between the two, you know, but really it's because most people by March don't have last year's income.
Right.
So that's why they will accept 2 years. In terms of where your frozen rent will be set, it just depends on when you apply actually. So when they receive your application, the lease that is in effect when they receive it, that's considered your current lease. The lease immediately prior to that is your prior lease, and your prior lease rent is going to be your frozen rent. So let's say you're about to switch from one lease to the next. If you've got a couple months left on your current lease, apply sooner rather than later, because once you cross over into the next lease, that lease is going to become your prior lease. And so your rent will be set at a higher frozen rent. So always apply as soon as you can, even if you don't have all your documents. It's kind of what SCRIE deems to be when they've gotten your application. So, you know, they could say it was received without all the documents. They might not say that, but it's best to try to submit everything, you know, unless you know that once you have your new income, that's going to be much better for you. That would be the only reason that I would wait.
Thank you. These are actually all such complicated questions and situations, and I think you're really giving people an excellent overview of how to handle these things and to just apply. Apply is the operative word. We have a question here. I am the executor of a friend's estate and trust and will receive a modest annual stipend for managing it. I know this is taxable, passive income, but does it hurt my ability to receive SCRIE? Or I will be able to receive SCRIE as long as I am below the $50,000. I think
That's correct. It doesn't affect your ability to be eligible for SCRIE. It will just be counted as income towards the 50,000 guideline.
Thank you. And how many previous leases, if you're an initial applicant for SCRIE, how many leases do you have to send in?
Just the two, your current lease and the one before. If you're close, you can send in 2 leases, you know, 3 leases if you're not sure if they're going to get your application in time. But really, the vast majority of people just need to send in their current lease and their previous lease.
Okay, current and previous 2 leases for initial. And how about if you've been on SCRIE for a while in terms of renewals? Do you get an alert about a renewal, or is it time to your lease renewal, or what does one have to do for renewal?
Both Department of Finance and HPD are very good about notifying tenants when they need SCRIE recipients, when they need to renew. And I believe the Department of Finance will send them out a renewal form.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So about 6 weeks before your benefit period is up, you should get a renewal form. But if you don't get one, don't wait. If you have everything, you can get that application online. You can call 311 and have them mail it to you, because sometimes those applications just get lost in the mail. But they are supposed to send you one about 6 weeks before your period is up.
And if you've been on SCRIE for quite a while, there's a shorter form or something?
Yes. If you've been approved for 5 cycles in a row before your current cycle, and that means basically your initial plus 4 renewals, then you get to use the short form, which does not require income information. There's just a question asking you, has your income gone up by $1,000 or more? That doesn't really happen to a lot of our applicants. So in that case, they don't have to send in income information. They just need to send in their renewal lease. And it's just this 1-page simple form.
Okay, now I preface this by, oh, sorry, Kim.
No, I
Yeah.
just wanted to emphasize, because we are focusing on DOL, of course, because rent stabilized apartment, many people have rent stabilized apartments. But I do want to emphasize that for Mitchell Lamas, HP or HDFC co-ops, HPD will also send you out the renewal form. But if you don't get it, you really do need to contact them as well.
And actually, someone asked, can NYCHA residents apply for SCRIE and DRE?
Unfortunately, no, because they're already receiving a subsidy and their rent is already 1/3 of their income. So unfortunately, no.
Okay, thank you. I know you're not accountants, but you're as close as we have here today. So if you transfer money from a traditional to a Roth IRA, is that money counted as income and directly apply to the 50,000 income limit? Well, a Roth is, I mean, you're just transferring money from
If it would be
traditional to Roth.
considered a straight rollover and there's no change in the type of account, besides it being, Roth and non-Roth, it shouldn't be counted as income. But again, it just depends on what your statements say, which processor you get.
Right.
Just kidding. No, it shouldn't, if it's a straight rollover, it shouldn't be counted.
Thank you. And this has come up a lot too. If renewal is revoked, my income changed, and your rent returns to the previous non-SCRIE rent, it jumps up. Does the rent return to what it was before SCRIE, or is it, what it would currently be had it not been frozen for those 2 years or 4 years?
Sadly, it goes to what is in your current lease. You're going to just pay your full lease rent.
Right, because remember, the landlord is, he's not really freezing the rent. It's still applied, and it's made up in a different way. So the actual rent is still the actual rent. The question also came up about MCIs and SCRIE. Can you talk about paying the MCIs? Does SCRIE cover the MCIs? Do you have to let finance know that there are MCIs? How can you?
Yeah, someone has
pay
to
them?
let finance know that there's an MCI for it to be worked into your frozen rent, or for your landlord to get the correct credit amount. So the rule regarding MCIs is if the MCI already had been issued more than 90 days prior to your application being received, that MCI is going to be the tenant's responsibility. They're not going to deduct it from the current rent. They're just going to include it as if it's just part of the regular rent. Any MCIs that are issued after that, SCRIE will cover. But they'll cover the amount that the landlord is allowed to charge. So right now, the landlord can only charge up to a certain percent per year. That is what SCRIE will cover.
Okay. And the same kind of question, if I was on SCRIE also froze my MCIs, but now I'm off SCRIE, I have to go back and pay that full rate of MCI.
Right.
Okay. The actual rent and the actual MCI. I'm sorry, I'm just scrolling through the questions. If I apply for SCRIE now, but my lease renews at a higher rate in the next month and I have not paid my taxes, can I apply now, or do I have to wait until my lease renews? I mean, if you haven't filed, it's not that you're not filing taxes, but you're late in filing taxes. What happens if you got an extension and can file late? Can you use?
If it's later than April 15th, you need to try and submit whatever documentation you have. So if you haven't filed your taxes, but you have W-2s or 1099s or your Social Security benefit letters, send that in. You'll probably get a letter from SCRIE saying we need your taxes, especially if you used to submit your taxes, but that'll buy you time, right? Because then you'll get your first and second and third notice, right? And hopefully by then you will have filed your taxes. If not, you can call our office and see what we can work out. I mean, not having your taxes filed on time shouldn't be a reason for you not to be able to renew your benefit.
Okay, so sorry, Kim.
I was just going to jump in about just to discuss HPD's policy, which is not as lenient. They will not process your SCRIE SCRIE application without your tax return if you do indeed file tax returns. If you don't, you can provide a non-filing form, as I mentioned earlier, but yeah, they will wait until the tax return is processed or is submitted.
Yeah, and similarly, the Department of Finance, they'll take those other documents. But if they know that you have filed taxes in the past, it might be that your renewal is not complete until they get either your taxes or a non-filing letter. It's sort of the same. But they will sort of, extend the process a little bit while they wait for that to happen.
So I think we'll clarify eligibility requirements because this question came in. So am I understanding this correctly? That I cannot apply until I actually am retired, no longer with an income? If I know I'll be retired August 1st, 2023, for example, do I need to wait till August 1st to apply? Perhaps that has to do with the income changing then.
So if,
No, go ahead, Amy.
so if if your concern is that until you retire, your income is going to be over, and you know for sure that you're going to retire, once you have retired, you can apply to SCRIE and ask and say, here's, again, you might need to have a notarized affidavit saying, I definitely retired on this date and I'm not going to continue to work. They might be able to exclude your wages from the income year that you report. So it's another example of don't wait. But unless they know that you retired on a certain date, they're going to include that wage income. And it's always a prior year, right? So if you're, if you're retiring right now, you're going to be reporting the prior year, and you'll have to tell SCRIE, I'm not going to have this wage income anymore. And they might exclude it. They might not, depending on when you retire and things like that. But, you can always reapply if they say no.
And I also believe there is a place on the application that asks, did you retire, or the date of your retirement? So you can indicate it there as well.
Thank you. And how long does the review process take? Generally, from the time you send in the application, how long does it take for a decision and notification of an award?
Probably what Kim says to this question is more useful, right? Because you see what the actual, we get the aspirational numbers.
I will say, to be perfectly frank, and I'm saying this because it's understandable why it's happening, but it is taking much longer recently to process SCRIE both by DOF and HPD. That includes renewals. It just is taking a long time. Most, probably due to staff shortages. So what might have taken as little as a couple of weeks will take a couple of months.
Mm-hmm. You have to be patient with it and try to get it in early, as you keep saying, both of you. Now this is interesting, and I think it does affect a lot of New Yorkers. My ex is still on the lease. So when you consider this person for SCRIE and you see two names on the lease, even though the other person isn't in the household, does that affect what you need to submit for SCRIE? Or do you just send the legal document of separation, or what happens if two names are on a lease, but the other person is not an occupant?
So that if that person is not living there anymore, but their name is still on the lease, if you can provide documentation that they have moved out, I don't think there's an official policy on this, because it is problematic if the person's name is on the lease, because all primary tenants on the lease are supposed to be household members. But you could try, again, submitting whatever court document says that you're separated, concrete proof like a state ID or something that has a different address, and see if SCRIE will exclude that income. Okay, and we're hearing from our artist community now. If I sell a screenplay or a painting or something that raises my income over 50,000, it's a one-time, it might be the spike in income that you referred to, Eni, but I never sell another one. How does that affect my SCRIE award? So you have a one-time, you sell a screenplay or a painting, you get a lot of money one time.
I mean, that is considered income. So if it happened last year, it would be included as your income for applying, when applying for SCRIE or DREE this year. If you don't, so if it puts you over the income limit, you can always try again next year if your income this year is 50,000 or under.
Thank you. Now this person says, and I've not seen this, my lease does not specify how much MCI is. How would I prove that my rent includes an MCI?
You can get documentation from,
I think it's HCR.
correct,
Yeah.
DHCR, and they will provide that documentation, proof of the MCI.
Okay.
And really, you should have, I mean, the landlord should have provided it to you when
Absolutely.
it was approved, but you can't get it from the city, the state.
I am just wanting to quickly, because we've had, okay. If a low income person gets accepted for help under the Medicare Savings Program, are those benefits counted as income?
What's counted as income is your income, your Social Security benefit, without that being taken. So let's say your Social Security is $1,000 and you're having $164 taken out now. Once you get on MSP, the Medicare Savings Program, you'll no longer have that deduction, $164. So it would bring your income up. So that's included as income.
Thank you. And now we're hearing from our business community.
Okay.
If one owns their business, it's an LLC, deductions for the business expenses reduce the income made. So is the net income in this case the correct income? If not, it would seem unfair since it's the business operating expense. I don't know, this might be a little too complicated and this person may just have to go through the process.
So yes, but just very, very broadly. So business income is looked at more as net. So for example, if you report on a Schedule 1, it's going to take that number, not the very bottom number, but it is going to allow for the expenses. Some expenses are added back in, and it's a bit complicated to get into now, but you shouldn't have to worry that your operating expenses are going to be ignored. They will be taken into account. And just since this opens an opportunity to mention this, if you have a net loss in your business, that is not going to be a deduction. You're just going to have it. Basically, it counts as zero. So if you think that your income is under only because you have business losses, that's not going to do it. But the good news is that your operational expenses are taken into account. It's not the same as like wage income where they're just going to take everything.
Thank you. And preferential rent, preferential tenant. I know part of the 2019 legislation that kind of collapsed to having the same increases as rent stabilization, but how about SCRIE and a person who's a preferential tenant? Can they apply with that lease for SCRIE?
You absolutely can. So the rule is if your benefit is, so for new applicants, it's really very straightforward. Your preferential rent is going to be treated just like any other rent. Your landlord would get credits based on increases to your preferential rent because after 2019, they can't just take that rent away. So that's basically the same as your legal rent as far as SCRIE is concerned. If your benefit was already in existence prior to July 1st, 2019, SCRIE based and they still do, and they will continue to do so. They're not going to change this. That's our understanding. It's based on your legal rent instead. So it's frozen at the legal rent. Credits are calculated according to increases to the legal rent. So I think most tenants who have pre-existing benefits that have preferential rent from that long ago kind of understand how it works. But you can call our office if you want an explanation. But the rule going forward is that, of course, you can apply and your rent should be frozen at the preferential level.
Right. Anything? This I know comes up a lot. How can I get a copy of my current RN 26 without going through my landlord management company, who are just very disagreeable people? Is there another, can you get it to HCR or?
Yeah, I mean, that's my understanding that you can get it at the HCR.
I think they should get it every year.
Yes.
And I think we've been pretty much through a lot of the questions here. Let me just make sure. What did they say? Chat amongst yourselves as I just scroll through quickly. Just again, because there were a few questions and you did cover it, but I do want to talk about succession and children. And I know it's two-pronged because if the child is not already on the lease, that's question number one, succession for the lease, but succession and SCRIE.
We do get calls from tenants who believe that they should succeed the prior tenant on the lease, but their landlord just, is not cooperating. But that
Right.
unfortunately is beyond the scope of SCRIE. We generally say to call the tenant helpline, call 311 and ask for the tenant helpline, or go to legal aid or legal services, because that's really a landlord tenant legal issue. We can't do anything about that. And we are going to need some indication that your landlord agrees that you can succeed to the lease. Now, sometimes, unfortunately, this does require taking the landlord to court. So we did have somebody who wanted to take over a benefit. And really, it took almost 2 years because, SCRIE held open that benefit takeover application. The one thing was missing was proof of succession rights. And it took 2 years in court for the landlord to finally say, okay, we'll put your name on the lease. So unfortunately, without the landlord, but it doesn't, some landlords just take a long time to add someone to a lease, but they'll say, we'll get to it. And those landlords sometimes, they'll write an email saying, yes, I agree, this person's name will be on the lease. And SCRIE will take that. But in terms of getting your landlord to agree to allow you on the lease, that's something that, SCRIE can't really do anything about.
Yeah, I mean, succession rights, I do want to, again, confirm what you're saying. It can be really complicated and a lot of landlords don't make it easy. I will tell you the law is if you're a senior and your child is with you, your child has to have lived with you for at least 1 year. You have to have lived in that apartment and you have to document it. They will definitely require all sorts of documentation. I must tell you, we have people who have phone records and ATM receipts and all kinds of information to prove that you were living in that apartment with the person for, if it's a senior, at least 1 year, if it's not a senior, at least 2 years. And of course, it's much less complicated if it's a direct relative. Sometimes more complicated, if it's not. The assumption is it's just a roommate, so it can be really complicated. So it's a two-prong issue. And anything else? I think we pretty much. Someone asked about MCIs. MCIs are major capital improvements. So if you don't know what it is, that's really good because you probably haven't been assessed with any. But usually if they are redoing the elevator or the roof or something, there's been a major capital improvement assessed to you as a renter. Anybody want any parting words that you think are really important to share?
Well, I want to thank Senator Krueger and you, Audrey and Wendy and Justin and everybody at your office for inviting us. And Inye, thank you for being here because I learned a number of things. So thank you so much for your expertise. And I just want to encourage people to contact Live on New York, not only for assistance with SCRIE and SCRIE renewals, but just to make sure that you're getting all the benefits that you may be eligible for. So that's my final word. Thank you.
Same here.
Same here, definitely. Apply, find out about the benefits you're entitled to, and use them if they're there for you to use. So apply. That's the bottom line of today's session. I want to thank everyone for joining us. As you saw and heard, we couldn't ask for two better people to help us learn more about SCRIE. You might have guessed these are our go-to people. So when you call our office and we're stumped, these are two of the people we call for information. So thank you again for Kim and Eni for always partnering with us and for doing so again today. Our next roundtable is scheduled for Thursday, March 8th from 7 p.m. to 8:45 p.m. and we'll focus on how to get repairs done in your rental apartment. Please note the evening time for that event. Again, that will be on March 8th from 7 to 8:45. If you're on our mailing list, you will of course get information and details about it. Thanks for joining us and have a wonderful day. Thank you.